The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers at 2:47 a.m., clattering against the concrete floor of my garage like a gunshot in the silence. Through the thin walls of our ranch house, I could hear my wife Andrea screaming at our 19-year-old daughter Sophie with the kind of venom that makes neighbors peek through their curtains. "If you don't behave, I'll give my 4 lips to someone else. I need some distance from this family." 4 lips? I wiped motor oil on my jeans and tried to process what I'd just heard. Hell, I was lucky if Andrea gave me 2 words a day, let alone any lips. The woman who used to kiss me goodbye every morning now treated me like a piece of furniture that needed dusting. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Jack Morrison, and at 45, I've learned that life has a twisted sense of humor. 23 years of marriage, and my wife was apparently shopping around her anatomy to the highest bidder. I owned Morrison's Auto Repair on the dying Main Street of Edgewater, Michigan, a town where everyone knew your business before you did, and gossip traveled faster than bad news. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Andrea's heels clicked across the driveway like bullets on pavement. Her silver BMW, the one I'd been making payments on for 3 years, roared to life and disappeared into the night. Sophie's bedroom light flickered off. The house went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Mrs. Rourke's dog barking next door. That woman had been our neighbor for 15 years and had appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood watch captain. Nothing happened on Maple Street without her knowing about it. I grabbed another beer from the mini fridge I kept in the garage and stared at the half-assembled transmission on my workbench. This was my sanctuary, the only place where things made sense anymore. You could take apart an engine, find the broken pieces, and fix them. Marriage, apparently, didn't work the same way. Andrea had been coming home late every weekend for the past 2 months. First it was girls' night out with her best friend Lila. Then it became networking events for her marketing job at Landry & Associates. The excuses kept changing, but the pattern stayed the same. She'd leave Friday evening and roll in sometime after midnight, reeking of expensive perfume and cheap wine. I'd married Andrea Walsh when she was 20 and I was 22. She'd been the prettiest girl at Edgewater Community College, with blonde hair that caught sunlight and green eyes that made me forget my own name. Back then, she'd laugh at my jokes and wear my Letterman jacket to football games. She'd even helped me change oil in customers' cars when I was getting the shop off the ground. Now she spent her days selling marketing packages to businesses in Grand Rapids and her nights doing God knows what with people who didn't have grease under their fingernails. The beer tasted bitter, but everything did these days. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Andrea's social media, something I'd started doing out of morbid curiosity. Her latest Instagram post showed her and Lila at some upscale bar in the city, both of them wearing dresses that cost more than I made in a week. The caption read, "Living our best lives. Jutter girls' night. Freedom, no regrets. 43 years old and still trying to be 21. I'd given up trying to understand it. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank Kowalski, my old buddy who ran the boxing gym downtown. "You still awake? Come by tomorrow. Got something to show you." Frank was one of the few people in Edgewater who didn't treat me like a charity case. He'd been a Golden Gloves boxer back in the day before a bad shoulder ended his career. Now he trained kids and middle-aged guys like me who needed somewhere to hit things legally. I typed back, "Sure, need to hit something anyway." The garage felt smaller than usual, cluttered with the debris of other people's problems. Broken down cars, busted lawnmowers, a motorcycle that hadn't run since the Clinton administration. At least these things were honest about being broken. I finished the beer and tried not to think about 4 lips or the way Andrea had looked at me during dinner, like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Tomorrow I'd pretend everything was normal. I'd fix other people's engines, come home to an empty house, and wait for my wife to remember she was married. But tonight, in the silence of my garage, I admitted something I'd been avoiding for months. My marriage was dying, and I had no idea how to fix it. The clock on the wall ticked past 3 a.m. Mrs. Rourke's dog had finally stopped barking. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, probably heading to another domestic dispute or bar fight. Just another Friday night in paradise. I turned off the garage light and headed inside, leaving the broken transmission for another day. Saturday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Andrea was already gone by the time I dragged myself out of bed at 8. No note, no explanation, just the lingering smell of her expensive perfume and an empty coffee pot. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone while eating cereal. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw Andrea's green eyes staring back at me with barely concealed contempt. "Mom said you were acting weird last night. she said without looking up from her screen. Define weird, I muttered, starting a fresh pot of coffee. I don't know. Spying on her or something? The coffee maker gurgled to life, and I tried to keep my voice level. Where'd she go this morning? Sophie shrugged. Yoga class with Aunt Lila, then shopping, then dinner. She said not to wait up. Lila wasn't actually Sophie's aunt, just Andrea's best friend since high school. Lila Brennan had never married, never had kids, and seemed to view my wife as her personal project in reclaiming lost youth. She owned a boutique in downtown Grand Rapids and spent her weekends dragging Andrea to clubs and bars that catered to people half their age. Your mom mention anything else? Just that you need to get a hobby or something? She said you're becoming obsessive. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, a Father's Day gift from Sophie when she was 12. The words "world's greatest dad" had faded, but I could still make them out if I squinted. I'm going to Frank's gym. You need anything? Sophie finally looked up from her phone. Yeah, Dad. I need you to stop being so pathetic. It's embarrassing. The words hit harder than any punch Frank had ever thrown at me during training. I stared at my daughter, this kid I'd taught to ride a bike, helped with homework, driven to soccer practice for 6 years, and saw a stranger. Excuse me? You heard me. Mom's trying to have a life, and you're acting like some jealous stalker. It's gross. I set down my coffee mug carefully, afraid I might throw it otherwise. What exactly has your mother told you? That you've been going through her stuff, following her around, making her feel trapped. She said you used to be fun, but now you're just... Sophie waved her hand dismissively. This. 23 years of marriage, 19 years of fatherhood, and I'd been reduced to this, whatever the hell that meant. I'm going to the gym, I said, grabbing my keys. Dad? Sophie called as I reached the door. Yeah? Maybe try to be someone Mom actually wants to come home to. I drove to Frank's gym with Sophie's words echoing in my head. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of October day that made Michigan almost beautiful. Edgewater looked better in autumn. The dying leaves distracted from the boarded-up storefronts and crumbling infrastructure. Frank's boxing club occupied the bottom floor of a brick building that had once housed a furniture store. The windows were covered with posters advertising local fights and fitness classes. Inside, the air smelled like sweat, leather, and the kind of honest work that left you tired but satisfied. Frank was in the ring with a kid who couldn't have been more than 16, teaching him how to throw a proper jab. At 52, Frank still moved like a dancer. His gray hair cropped short, and his weathered face focused on the lesson. Morrison, he called when he saw me. Perfect timing. Tommy here needs to see what happens when you don't keep your guard up. I changed into workout clothes and joined them in the ring. For the next hour, I forgot about Andrea, Sophie, and Four Lips. I focused on footwork, combinations, and the satisfying thud of gloves against heavy bags. When we finished, Frank sent Tommy home and gestured for me to follow him to his office, a cramped space behind the gym filled with fight posters and trophies from his competitive days. You look like hell, he said, tossing me a towel. Feel worse. Frank opened a small refrigerator and pulled out 2 bottles of water. Andrea still giving you grief? I'd known Frank since high school, and he'd been there through all the major moments of my life. My wedding, Sophie's birth, the early struggles of building my business. He was the closest thing I had to a best friend, which said something depressing about my social life. She's having an affair, I said, surprised by how easily the words came out. Frank nodded like he'd been expecting this. You sure? Pretty sure. Late nights, new clothes, attitude change, plus some things I overheard last night. What kind of things? I told him about the Four Lips comment and Andrea's recent behavior. Frank listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. You confront her yet? What's the point? She'll just lie, and I'll look like the paranoid husband. Frank leaned back in his chair. So what's your plan? I don't have one. That's the problem. Wrong answer, Jack. You always have a plan. Question is whether you're going to be the victim or the guy who fights back. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a notification. Andrea had posted a new photo on Instagram. Her and Lila at some trendy brunch spot, mimosas in hand, both of them laughing at something off-camera. The caption read, Brunch with my partner in crime. So grateful for friends who understand that life is meant to be lived. Brunch life. Grateful have new beginnings. New beginnings. The phrase felt like a knife between my ribs. Let me see that, Frank said, taking my phone. He studied the photo for a long moment, then handed it back. You recognize the place? Looks like that new spot on Division Street, the one that charges $20 for eggs. Expensive taste for a yoga morning? I looked at the photo again, noticing details I'd missed the first time. Andrea was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Black, form-fitting, definitely not yoga attire. Her makeup was perfect, her hair styled like she was going to a cocktail party, not brunch with a girlfriend. "Frank, what did you want to show me?" He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. "Mrs. Rourke stopped by yesterday evening, said she had something you needed to see." My heart sank. If Mrs. Rourke was getting involved, half the neighborhood already knew whatever I was about to discover. Frank handed me the envelope. "She was walking her dog Thursday night around 11 when she saw Andrea come home, said she wasn't alone." I opened the envelope and found 3 printed photographs, obviously taken with a phone from Mrs. Rourke's front window. The first showed Andrea's BMW pulling into our driveway. The second showed her getting out of the passenger side, not the driver's side. The third showed a man I didn't recognize walking her to the front door, his hand on the small of her back. The man was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of build that came from serious gym time. He was wearing a tight t-shirt that showed off his arms and jeans that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. "Mrs. Rourke know who he is?" She asked around. Turns out he's some personal trainer from that fancy gym in Grand Rapids. Trent something? I stared at the photos, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just an emotional affair or a midlife crisis. This was my wife bringing another man to our home, to the house I'd been paying for since before Sophie was born. "There's more," Frank said quietly. He handed me another photo, this one showing the man leaving our house at what looked like dawn, checking his phone as he walked to a red sports car parked down the street. "Mrs. Rourke's an early riser," Frank explained. "Takes her dog out every morning at 5:30. She said this guy left Friday morning around 6. Friday morning. The day before Andrea made her comment about 4 lips and needing distance, I felt something shift inside me, like a gear clicking into place. The hurt and confusion I'd been carrying for months crystallized into something sharper and more focused. My wife wasn't just cheating on me, she was flaunting it, bringing her boyfriend into our home while I slept in the garage working on other people's broken engines. "Jack?" Frank's voice seemed to come from far away. "You okay?" I looked up at him and realized I was smiling. Not a happy smile, something else entirely. "Yeah," I said, sliding the photos back into the envelope. "I think I'm finally starting to understand the situation." Frank studied my face with the careful attention he'd once reserved for opponents in the ring. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to stop being the victim." Sunday morning brought the kind of silence that only comes after revelations. Andrea had stumbled in around 3 a.m., and I'd listened from the couch as she bumped into furniture and muttered to herself in the hallway. Now she was sleeping off whatever she'd done the night before, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Rourke's photos spread out like evidence in a murder trial. Sophie wandered downstairs around 10, looking like she'd been hit by a truck. College life was apparently taking its toll. "Where's Mom?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. "Sleeping. Late night." Sophie nodded like this was perfectly normal. She said she might take me shopping later. "I need new clothes for school." "With what money?" The question came out sharper than I'd intended. Sophie looked at me with surprise. "What do you mean?" I gathered up the photos and slid them back into the envelope. "Your mother's been spending a lot lately. New clothes, expensive restaurants, that car payment. Just wondering where it's all coming from." "She works, Dad. She makes good money." "Not that good." Sophie's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "Are you seriously going to start controlling her spending now? God, no wonder she needs space." There it was again. Space. The magic word that apparently justified everything. "Sophie, when's the last time you and I had a real conversation? Just the two of us?" She looked at her phone instead of answering, which was answer enough. "I'm going to run some errands," I said, standing up. "Tell your mother I'll be back later." "Where are you going?" "To get some space." My first stop was the bank. I'd been putting off checking our accounts for months, partly because I was busy and partly because I didn't want to know how bad things had gotten. The ATM receipt made my stomach drop. Our joint checking account was nearly empty, and our savings had been reduced to less than $3,000. I went inside and asked to speak with someone about our account activity. The bank manager, a woman named Carol, who'd handled our mortgage for years, pulled up our records with a concerned expression. "Mr. Morrison, I have to say, there's been some unusual activity lately. Large cash withdrawals, transfers to accounts I don't recognize. Has your wife discussed these with you?" She showed me printouts of the last 3 months. Andrea had been pulling out $500 to $1,000 in cash every week, plus making transfers to an account at a different bank. In total, she'd moved nearly $15,000 out of our joint accounts. No, I said quietly. She hasn't mentioned it. Carol looked uncomfortable. I probably should have called, but since it's a joint account and she's an authorized user. I understand. Can you put a hold on any future large withdrawals? Require both signatures? Absolutely. I'll set that up right away. My second stop was Landry and Associates, the marketing firm where Andrea worked. The office was in a converted Victorian house on the outskirts of downtown, all polished wood and expensive furniture designed to impress clients. The receptionist, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, looked up when I walked in. I'm here to see Mr. Landry, I said. I'm Jack Morrison, Andrea Morrison's husband. Oh, is everything okay? Andrea called in sick on Friday. Friday, the day she'd supposedly been at yoga and shopping. Just need to clarify something about her schedule. Is Mr. Landry available? Richard Landry was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who'd built his business on the principle that image was everything. His office walls were covered with awards and photos of him, with local politicians and business leaders. Jack, good to see you. How's the auto repair business? Can't complain. Listen, Richard, I need to ask you about Andrea's work schedule. She's been putting in a lot of extra hours lately, and I wanted to make sure she's not overdoing it. Landry's expression shifted slightly. Extra hours? Jack, Andrea works a pretty standard schedule, Monday through Friday, usually out by 5. She hasn't put in overtime in months. What about evening events? Networking? Client dinners? We haven't had any evening events since the Summer Chamber of Commerce mixer, and Andrea doesn't typically handle clients that would require dinner meetings. I felt that cold, hard feeling in my chest expand. What about last Friday? She mentioned having to work late? Friday? No, Andrea called in sick Friday, said she had some kind of stomach bug. We looked at each other for a long moment. Landry was clearly putting pieces together, and his discomfort was obvious. Jack, is everything all right at home? Just trying to keep track of things. You know how it is? Of course. Well, if you have any concerns about Andrea's work performance, please let me know. She's a valued employee, but we do expect honesty and reliability. The message was clear. He was giving me ammunition if I needed it. My third stop was the gym where Trent worked. It took some asking around, but I finally tracked down Elite Fitness on the north side of Grand Rapids. The place was everything I'd expected. Gleaming equipment, motivational posters, and staff members who looked like they'd been carved from marble. I paid for a day pass and spent 20 minutes walking around, pretending to evaluate the facilities while actually looking for my wife's boyfriend. I found him in the free weights section, spotting a woman who was clearly more interested in his attention than her workout. Trent Mitchell was exactly what the photos had suggested, mid-30s, artificially tanned, and wearing clothes designed to show off every muscle. He had the kind of confident smile that came from never being told no, and the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. I watched him for 15 minutes, noting the way he touched his clients. Always finding excuses to put his hands on them, standing closer than necessary, making comments that walked the line between professional and inappropriate. This wasn't a guy who'd stumbled into an affair with my wife. This was a predator who'd made a career out of seducing married women. When his session ended, I approached him at the water fountain. Excuse me, are you Trent? He looked up with that practiced smile. That's me. You interested in personal training? Maybe. I heard you work with some clients from Edgewater. My wife mentioned you might be good. Oh yeah? What's your wife's name? Andrea Morrison. The smile faltered for just a second, so briefly that someone who wasn't looking for it might have missed it. But I was looking for it, and I saw the recognition in his eyes. Morrison? Doesn't ring a bell, but I work with a lot of people. What kind of training is she looking for? The kind that keeps her out until 3 a.m. Now the smile disappeared entirely. Trent straightened up, and I could see him calculating his options. Look, man, I don't know what you're implying, but... I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You've been sleeping with my wife, you've been to my house, and you've been helping her spend money we don't have. Am I missing anything? Trent looked around nervously, clearly aware that we were attracting attention from other gym members. You need to leave, he said quietly. Actually, you need to leave. You need to stay away from my wife, stay away from my house, and find someone else to fund your little lifestyle. Or what? I stepped closer, close enough to smell his expensive cologne and see the uncertainty in his eyes. For all his muscles and swagger, Trent had probably never been in a real fight in his life. Or I'll make sure everyone in this gym knows exactly what kind of personal training you really provide. I'll make sure your boss knows. I'll make sure your other clients know. How's that sound? Trent's face flushed red. You're crazy. Maybe. But I'm also right, and we both know it. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing by the water fountain with his mouth hanging open. As I reached the exit, I heard him call out, "This isn't over." I looked back and smiled. That same cold smile Frank had noticed the day before. You're absolutely right, I said. It's just getting started. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray sky that made October in Michigan feel like a preview of hell. I was in the shop by 7, working on a transmission rebuild that should have been finished last week. The familiar rhythm of mechanical work helped clear my head and focus my thoughts. Around 9, Frank showed up with coffee and donuts from the bakery down the street. Thought you might need fuel, he said, setting the bag on my workbench. You look like you didn't sleep. Couldn't turn my brain off. Frank nodded and pulled up a folding chair. Want to talk about it? I told him about my weekend discoveries, the bank accounts, Andrea's lies about work, my confrontation with Trent. Frank listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. So, what's your next move? He asked when I finished. I'm not sure. Part of me wants to confront Andrea directly, but I know she'll just lie and try to turn it around on me. What about evidence? If you're thinking divorce, you'll need documentation. The word divorce hung in the air between us like smoke. I'd been avoiding thinking about it directly, but Frank was right. That's where this was heading. I've got the photos, the bank records, probably enough to prove adultery if it comes to that. Probably isn't good enough. You need to be sure. Frank was right, but the thought of playing private detective on my own wife made me feel sick. Still, Andrea had made her choices. Now I had to make mine. There's something else, Frank said, his voice more serious. I heard some things over the weekend. People talking. What kind of things? The affair isn't exactly a secret anymore. Mrs. Rourke's been talking, and you know how that goes. By now, half the town knows Andrea's stepping out. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. It was one thing to know my marriage was falling apart. It was another to have it become public entertainment. What are people saying? The usual garbage. Some folks feel bad for you. Others think you must have done something to drive her away. There's even some speculation about whether you know or not. Great. So I'm either a victim or an idiot. Or a guy who's about to show everyone what he's really made of. Frank's words stayed with me as I worked through the morning. Around noon, Sophie showed up at the shop, something she hadn't done in years. Dad, can we talk? She looked nervous, fidgeting with her phone and avoiding eye contact. I wiped my hands on a rag and gestured to the small office area. What's up, kiddo? It's about Mom and other stuff. Sophie sat down heavily in the client chair, looking younger than her 19 years. I heard some girls talking at school about Mom and some guy. They said everyone in town knows except you. The words hit harder coming from my daughter. I sat down across from her, trying to keep my expression neutral. What exactly did you hear? That she's been cheating on you, that she brought him to our house, that she's been lying about where she goes at night. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, and I saw my little girl again, not the sarcastic teenager who'd been treating me like an embarrassment. Dad, I'm so sorry. I said those awful things to you yesterday, and all this time. Hey, it's okay. You didn't know. But I should have known. I should have paid attention instead of just believing everything she told me. I reached across and squeezed her hand. This isn't your fault, Sophie. None of it. What are you going to do? It was the same question Frank had asked, the same question I'd been asking myself, but sitting there with my daughter, seeing the pain in her eyes, I felt something crystallize. I'm going to handle it. What does that mean? It means your mother made her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences. Sophie studied my face with the same intensity I'd seen in Andrea when we first met, back when she actually cared about what I was thinking. You're different, she said finally. Since yesterday, you seem, I don't know, stronger. Maybe I am. After Sophie left, I spent the afternoon thinking about consequences and choices. Andrea had been playing a game where she made all the moves, and I just reacted. It was time to change the rules. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stay away from the gym. This is your only warning. Trent. The idiot was actually trying to intimidate me via text message. I screenshot the message and saved it to a folder I'd started labeled Evidence. Then I typed back, see you soon. Around 5, I locked up the shop and drove to Lila's boutique in Grand Rapids. If I was going to understand what was really happening, I needed to talk to my wife's partner in crime. Brennan's boutique occupied a corner space in a trendy shopping district that catered to women with more money than sense. The window display featured mannequins wearing clothes that cost more than most people's car payments. Lila was behind the counter when I walked in, helping a customer select a purse that probably cost $1,000. She looked up when the bell chimed, and her expression shifted from professional smile to barely concealed panic. "Jack, what a surprise. What brings you downtown?" "Need to talk to you about Andrea." The customer looked between us, sensing tension. Lila forced another smile. "Mrs. Patterson, why don't you take your time looking around? I'll be right back." She gestured for me to follow her to a small office behind the main sales floor. The space was cramped but expensive, like everything else about Lila's life. "What's this about?" she asked, closing the door. "You know exactly what it's about. The question is whether you're going to be honest or make me spell it out." Lila had always been attractive in a high-maintenance way. Perfectly styled hair, professional makeup, clothes that screamed designer labels. But up close, I could see the cracks in the facade. She was trying too hard, spending too much, living beyond her means just like Andrea. "I don't know what Andrea's told you, but Andrea hasn't told me anything. That's the problem." Lila sat down behind her desk, buying time to think. I remained standing, letting the silence stretch until she couldn't handle it anymore. "Look, Jack, marriages go through rough patches. Andrea's just trying to figure some things out. By sleeping with a personal trainer half her age? I don't know what you think you know, but I know she's been lying about where she goes at night. I know she's been draining our bank accounts. I know she brought him to our house, and I know you've been helping her do it." Lila's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. "She's unhappy, Jack. Has been for years. You work all the time. You don't pay attention to her. You've let yourself go. What did you expect?" "I expected my wife to act like an adult, to talk to me if she was unhappy instead of running around behind my back." "She tried talking to you. You never listened." "When? When did she try?" Lila faltered, clearly realizing she'd overplayed her hand. "I don't remember specific times, but because there weren't any. Andrea decided she wanted something else, and instead of being honest about it, she chose to sneak around and make me look like a fool. It's not that simple. Actually, it is. She made a choice, and you helped her make it. Now you both get to deal with what comes next." I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "One more thing, Lila. If I find out you've been giving her money or helping her hide assets, I'll make sure the IRS knows about every cash transaction that's gone through this place in the last 5 years." Her face went white. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening you. I'm promising you. Stay out of my marriage or become part of the collateral damage." I left her sitting behind her desk, staring after me with her mouth open. As I walked to my truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. For the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't reacting to someone else's moves. I was making my own.